Our next guest, Joshua Safran, is an attorney, writer, speaker, and occasional rabbi, and was featured in the award-winning documentary Crime After Crime. He's a nationally recognized champion for women's rights and a zealous advocate for survivors of domestic violence and the wrongfully imprisoned. For his work, he's received national media coverage and numerous awards. He's out with a memoir of his childhood called Free Spirit, Growing Up on the Road and Off the Grid. And he's with us on the phone. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Suzanne, for having me.
The first part of your memoir is this amazingly unconventional childhood, truly off the grid with your mom. Tell us how that came about. You had a single mom, and take it from there.
I did, yeah. So I was born into a coven of witches in a commune in the Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco in 1975. And the first couple years, my mother sort of wandering around different communities in San Francisco before taking to the road in 1980, and didn't have a father who was involved in any way, and my mother was really honestly looking for utopia. Part of it was she was afraid newly elected President Reagan was going to trigger nuclear war with Russia, and part of it was she was looking for this kind of ideal commune where there wouldn't be any capitalism and everything would be done on the basis of barter and trade and everyone would be equal, that kind of thing. And we actually ended up finding something like that, although by the time we found it, I was a teenager and no longer interested in her vision of utopia. But we ended up spending my childhood basically wandering around, hitchhiking, and living in a variety of strange places in this elusive hunt for utopia.
What were some of the places you called home?
Well, we lived in a lot of communes. We lived in a blue van, a green bus, an ice cream truck, trailer, a variety of cabins in various states of construction and disrepair. We slept on the forest floor, and sort of the worst place we ever lived was a lean-to on a stump in the middle of a temperate rainforest on one of the San Juan Islands in Washington State.
This was your experience, your only experience of childhood, so did you think at the time that it was unconventional, weird, or it was just how you lived?
It's a good question. The all of Free Spirit is basically my voyage of discovery, and I kind of liken myself to Columbus. Columbus discovered America, which I'm sure came as a surprise to the people who lived in America. So, I feel like I did the same thing. Free Spirit is about me sort of discovering America, much to the surprise of the people who are around me. But of course, when you're a kid, what's presented to you, especially what's presented to you by your mother, is normal. That you just expect that that's the world the way it is. And slowly over time, I didn't go to school, so I didn't necessarily have a sense of what else, what other kids were doing. But over time, it was like, well, maybe not everyone lives the way we do. Maybe not everyone, thinks about things the way we do. Until I went into sixth grade, and in sixth grade, I decided I'm going to school. I'm going to get an education. I'm going to get out of this. And it was a very, very rude awakening, of course.
And also, you had it was not exactly utopia, especially after your mom got involved with this violent man.
Yes. So my mother sort of went from strange man to strange man over the course of our journeys, and they were all kind of quirky and quite literally crazy in some cases. But it wasn't until I was 9 when she met up with a guy named Leopoldo who was, billed himself as a Central American revolutionary shaman, healer, poet, but was fundamentally a violent alcoholic, draped in some, leftist fabric. And that was pretty awful. He beat my mother pretty regularly once they were married, or actually right before they were married, it began, and was abusive with me as well. And that sort of that dark side, what I like to call the dark side of the age of Aquarius, is really what compelled me and forced me to want to get out of that, and to sort of at that point looking at my mother's whole trajectory and saying, this isn't right. I can see now that other kids are living in a way where they don't have to do this, and not only do they have television and nice clothing and other things, but they also aren't being beaten by a violent guy. And luckily for me, I had that example of looking at other kids and seeing a different reality. Some kids don't, but I did.
But when you entered mainstream education, it was not easy for you. You had to deal with some violence from bullies, right?
Absolutely, right. So I wander in after sleeping on the forest floor, kind of covered in pine needles and cedar sprays, quoting Karl Marx and expecting that I'm going to show up and sort of razzle-dazzle everyone with my intelligence. And of course, first of all, when you come to school dressed in thrift store clothing patched with paisley patches and quoting Karl Marx, you're just in a recipe for, being beaten on it in and of itself. But also, I didn't even understand the dynamic of a classroom, that you had to raise your hand to be called upon. I sort of showed up on day one. Whenever the teacher asked a question that I knew the answer to, I sort of blurted out the answer in an effort to show everyone how smart I was. And of course, showing sixth graders how smart you are is yet another recipe for getting a butt kicking outside.
Well,
so, that was part of it,
And you survived and thrived.
I did. Thankfully, I did. And it took me a long time, and I had sort of, some dark years in my teenage years as we sort of survived and stood up to my stepfather and got away. But yeah, I went on to go to law school, to college and law school, and most of that all on scholarship, which was, the result of a lot of hard work. But I will say that, my mother, throughout it all, despite the fact that she lived in a different reality from most everyone else, she always did tell me, oh, you can do whatever you want, you're the greatest, you're smart, and in fact, sometimes may have even thought that I was like the Messiah, but, she definitely never told me that I couldn't do anything. So a lot of free spirit is about the kind of really unprecedented freedom that I experienced as a kid, like as a little boy running around in the forest with a sort of only very loosely supervised by my mother, and a real sense of confidence and trust in self and empathy for those around me, kind of feeling like I was the man of the house at the age of like 6.
This memoir is amazing. It's very compelling. It touches on violence, poverty, counterculture, domestic violence, and it's called Free Spirit, Growing Up on the Road and Off the Grid. Joshua Safran, that's Safran. Do you have a website?
I do. It's jsafran.com, and you can also check out freespiritbook.net.
freespiritbook.net. All right. Thank you so much.
Suzanne.